The morning sun crept through the tall windows of Stage 7 at Paramount Studios. Clint Eastwood arrived early as he always did. At 92 years old, he still kept to the habits formed over 7 decades in Hollywood. His driver, Sam Baker, helped him from the car, but Eastwood waved away the offered arm. He walked slowly but steadily, his tall frame slightly bent with age but still carrying the unmistakable presence that had made him a legend. "Morning, Mr. Eastwood," called out Betty Adams, the script supervisor who had worked with him on his last 3 films. She held a coffee cup in one hand and a stack of revised script pages in the other. Eastwood nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in what passed for a smile these days. "Any changes I need to know about?" he asked, his voice that familiar rasp that had become more pronounced with age. "Just a few tweaks to the courthouse scene. Mr. Porter thought the judge's lines needed more punch." Eastwood took the pages. John Porter was a good writer, and Eastwood trusted his judgment. This film, a drama about a retired judge facing his past mistakes, was likely to be Eastwood's last as both director and star. He wanted it to be right. The set was a perfect replica of a federal courtroom. Eastwood walked through it slowly, feeling the weight and solemnity of the space, even though it was just plywood and paint. He had always believed that a good set helped actors find the truth in their performances. Mary Williams, his assistant director for nearly 15 years, approached with the day's shooting schedule. "We're set to start at 9 with the confrontation scene. The extras will be here at 8:30. Eastwood nodded, his eyes still taking in the details of the judge's bench. "Let's run through it once before they get here. I want to feel the rhythm." Mary smiled. This was why she loved working with Eastwood. Even now he cared about the craft, about getting the small things right. They were discussing a change to the camera angle when the main door to the soundstage opened. 3 men in dark suits entered. They moved with purpose, scanning the room before focusing on Eastwood. The tallest one, a man with close-cropped gray hair and a face that seemed carved from stone, led the way. Mary stepped forward. "I'm sorry. Gentlemen, this is a closed set. If you're from the studio, you need to check in with..." The man held up a badge. "FBI, I'm Special Agent Frank Morris. We need to speak with Mr. Eastwood." A silence fell over the set. The few crew members present stopped what they were doing. Eastwood himself stood very still, his face showing no reaction. "What's this about?" he asked quietly. Morris glanced around at the watching crew. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere private." "Sir?" Eastwood shook his head. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." The agent's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. "Clint Eastwood, I have a warrant for your arrest." He produced an official-looking document from his jacket pocket. "You are being charged under sealed indictment 22 CR 4856. Mary gasped. "This must be some kind of mistake." Eastwood remained perfectly still, his eyes locked on Morris. "What are the charges?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that here, sir. The charges are sealed by order of the federal court." One of the other agents moved forward, removing handcuffs from his belt. Eastwood looked at the metal restraints with an expression that gave nothing away. "Is that necessary?" Mary asked, her voice rising with indignation. "Do you know who this is?" "It's standard procedure, ma'am," Morris replied, his tone professional, but firm. Eastwood slowly extended his hands. "It's all right, Mary." The second agent stepped behind Eastwood and carefully secured the cuffs around his wrists. For a man who had spent his career playing tough characters who defied authority, there was something deeply unsettling about seeing him submit to this indignity without protest. "Mr. Eastwood, you have the right to remain silent," Morris began, reciting the familiar Miranda warning that Eastwood himself had delivered countless times in his film roles. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Word spread quickly. By the time the agents were escorting Eastwood through the main lot toward the parking area, dozens of crew members from nearby stages had gathered. They watched in stunned silence as the Hollywood icon was led to a waiting black SUV, his hands cuffed behind his back. Someone took a photo with their phone. Within minutes, the image was spreading across social media and news sites. Clint Eastwood, actor, director, former mayor, American institution, in handcuffs, being taken away by federal agents. At the downtown federal building, Eastwood was processed like any other suspect. Fingerprints, photograph, personal items cataloged and stored. Through it all, he said almost nothing, answering direct questions with the fewest possible words. When offered his phone call, he contacted Linda Harrington, an attorney who had represented several high-profile clients in federal cases. She arrived within the hour, a tall woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. The guards led her to a small conference room where Eastwood waited. "Clint," she said, setting her briefcase on the table. "What on earth is going on?" "I was hoping you could tell me," he replied. "They won't say what the charges are." Linda frowned. "That's unusual. Sealed indictments are typically used in cases involving national security or when publicity might compromise an ongoing investigation." She studied his face. "Does that mean anything to you?" Eastwood looked away, his gaze fixing on the blank wall. For a moment, something flickered across his features, a shadow of memory perhaps, or concern. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual stoic expression. "No," he said. "Nothing." But Linda had known him long enough to sense the lie. She didn't press it. Not yet. "They'll have to reveal the charges at your arraignment," she said. "Until then, I'll file motions to unseal the indictment. This kind of secrecy is rarely justified." Outside the federal building, a crowd had gathered. News vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions as Linda emerged, but she gave only a brief statement. "Mr. Eastwood denies all allegations and will be vindicated." By evening, the story dominated every news channel. Legal experts debated what could possibly have led to the arrest of one of America's most beloved cultural icons. Political commentators wondered if his conservative views had made him a target. Hollywood figures expressed shock and support, and Clint Eastwood sat in a detention cell saying nothing to anyone. The next morning, his son Kyle arrived at the detention center. The guards led him to a visiting room where his father waited. "Dad," Kyle said, his voice thick with emotion. "What's happening?" Eastwood looked at his son with tired eyes. "I'm not sure yet. The lawyers must know something. The whole world is talking about this." Eastwood shook his head. "Linda's working on it, but for now we have to wait." Kyle leaned forward. "Dad, if there's something from the past, something that might explain this, now's the time to talk about it." For a long moment, Eastwood was silent. Then he looked directly at his son. "There are some things better left alone, Kyle. Some stories that shouldn't be told. But if it could help, it won't help," Eastwood said firmly. "It will only make things worse. For everyone." Outside, reporters asked Kyle what his father had said. "He's strong and determined," was all he would tell them. As days passed, the mystery only deepened. Government officials remained tight-lipped. Judge Howard Benton, assigned to the case, denied all motions to unseal the indictment, citing national security concerns. And through it all, Clint Eastwood maintained his silence, a silence as powerful and haunting as any line he had ever delivered on screen. No one knew that thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C., Senator Patricia Donovan from Wyoming was reviewing classified files that would soon bring her into Eastwood's story and shatter the silence that had lasted for more than 50 years. 2 weeks passed since Clint Eastwood's arrest. The initial shock had given way to a steady hum of speculation. News outlets ran special reports with titles like "The Eastwood Mystery" and "Silence on Trial." Outside the federal detention center, small groups of fans gathered daily, holding signs that read "Free Clint" and "American Icon, American Injustice." Inside her Washington, D.C. office, Senator Patricia Donovan stared at the file on her desk. As a senior member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, she had access to information few others did. What she had discovered in the archives had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. Her aide, Greg Wilson, knocked and entered with a cup of coffee. "You look tired, Senator." Patricia nodded, taking the cup. "I am. This Eastwood situation is worse than I thought." "Worse how?" Greg asked, glancing at the classified folder. "This goes back to 1968. Prague. The height of the Cold War. She rubbed her temples. I need to see the rest of the files, the ones they're keeping from the committee. Greg shifted uncomfortably. Senator, maybe we should let this go. If the CIA is involved, then an American citizen is being persecuted to cover up their mistakes. Her voice was firm. I didn't come to Washington to look the other way. Meanwhile, in a small conference room at the detention center, Linda Harrington met with Eastwood. 3 meetings with the prosecutor had yielded nothing. Judge Benton had denied all her motions. They're keeping everything sealed, she told Eastwood. I can't fight what I can't see. Eastwood sat across from her, looking thinner than he had 2 weeks ago. Prison didn't agree with him, but he showed no signs of breaking. Have you considered that cooperation might be the best option? Linda asked carefully. If there's something from your past, something about Czechoslovakia in 1968. Eastwood's eyes narrowed. How do you know about that? The prosecutor, Alan. Peters mentioned it, just in passing. He was trying to get me to advise you to cooperate. Linda leaned forward. Clint, I can't help you if you don't tell me the truth. Eastwood was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a soft sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. I was filming Where Eagles Dare in Europe. The studio arranged for me to take a short trip to Prague to meet with a Czech director who wanted to work with me. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. It was supposed to be a simple cultural exchange, Hollywood reaching across the Iron Curtain. But it wasn't that simple, Linda prompted. Eastwood shook his head. No. When I got there, I was approached by a man who said he worked for the American Embassy. He asked me to deliver a package to someone. Said it contained film scripts and cultural materials that were being monitored by the Czech authorities. And you agreed? I was young. It seemed exciting, playing spy for real. A bitter smile crossed his face. I didn't know I was being used. Used how? The package contained something else. Information. I never knew exactly what. But that night, after I delivered it, there was an incident. People died. Eastwood's voice dropped almost to a whisper. 3 people. They said they were Czech secret police, but I never knew for sure. Linda felt a chill. Were you involved in their deaths? No, Eastwood said firmly. I was just the delivery boy. But when I got back to my hotel, the embassy man was waiting. He said there had been complications and I needed to leave immediately. They got me out that night. And afterward? 2 men visited me back in the States. They never said which agency they were from. They explained that what happened was classified. National security. If I ever spoke about it, I could be charged with treason. Eastwood's jaw tightened. They made it clear my career would be over too. Linda wrote notes quickly. But that was more than 50 years ago. Why would they come after you now? Someone must be afraid I'll talk. Someone still in power who was involved back then. Across town in the U.S. Attorney's office, Prosecutor Alan Peters met with a man who introduced himself only as Mr. White. They sat in Peters' office with the blinds drawn. The judge is cooperating fully, Peters reported. Benton understands the sensitivity. White nodded. And the defense attorney? Harrington is persistent but getting nowhere. All the critical documents remain sealed. Good. White checked his watch. We need to move this along. The preliminary hearing is in 1 week. Make sure it stays closed to the public. Already arranged. But there's a problem. Peters slid a paper across the desk. Senator Donovan has requested to attend as an observer. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, she has the clearance. White's face hardened. Deny it. I can't. She went over my head. The request was approved by the Attorney General himself. White stood abruptly. That woman has been asking too many questions about old operations. Find a way to delay the hearing. On worry. What grounds? I don't care. National security, new evidence, make something up. White moved to the door. Just keep her away from Eastwood. In her apartment that evening, Senator Donovan received a call from a blocked number. The voice was elderly, male, and frightened. Senator Donovan? My name is Joseph Miller. I worked for the CIA from 1965 to 1988. Patricia sat up straight. How? Did you get this number, Mr. Miller? That doesn't matter. What matters is Eastwood. I was part of the Prague operation. What they're doing to him is wrong. Tell me what happened, she said, reaching for a pen. Not on the phone. I have documents. The real story. His voice trembled. They'll deny everything. They'll say I'm senile, but the papers don't lie. Where can we meet? Tomorrow. The Lincoln Memorial. 10 a.m. He paused. Be careful, Senator. The people behind this have been protecting this secret for 50 years. They won't stop now. Next morning, Patricia arrived at the memorial 10 minutes early. She sat on the steps pretending to read a newspaper. At exactly 10, she saw an elderly man with a cane slowly climbing the steps. He carried a thin briefcase. Just as he was about to reach her, a jogger bumped into him hard. The old man stumbled. The jogger grabbed the briefcase and was gone before anyone could react, disappearing into a waiting car. Patricia helped the old man up. His face was pale with fear. That was it, he whispered. All the evidence. Mr. Miller, you need to come with me. We can still... No. He pulled away from her. They know. It's not safe. He pressed something into her hand. A small flash drive. Not everything. Just enough to know I'm telling the truth. The rest? He shook his head and hurried away as fast as his aged legs could carry him. That night, in her secure office, Patricia viewed the contents of the drive. Most files were heavily redacted, but one document remained intact. A CIA memo discussing Operation Spotlight, which used Hollywood assets for package delivery in denied areas. Eastwood's name appeared, identified as Unwitting Courier E. Photo showed a young Clint Eastwood shaking hands with a man identified only as Station Chief Prague. In the background, partially blurred, was another figure, a man Patricia recognized despite the decades that had passed. It was the current Director of National Intelligence, Edward Grant. She sat back, her heart pounding. Now she understood why. They were so desperate to keep Eastwood silent. This wasn't about protecting national security. This was about protecting careers and legacies. Patricia made her decision. She would attend Eastwood's hearing, no matter what obstacles they put in her way, and she would bring the truth with her. The day of Clint Eastwood's preliminary hearing arrived with unusual weather for Los Angeles, a gray sky that threatened rain. By dawn, crowds had gathered outside the federal courthouse. Police set up barriers to keep protesters and supporters separate from news crews and curious onlookers. Inside, final preparations were underway. Judge Howard Benton met with security officials in his chambers. I want the building completely locked down, he instructed. No phones, no recording devices, no exceptions. The chief of security nodded. Already arranged, Your Honor. We've also secured the underground entrance for the prisoner's arrival. And the senator? Benton asked, his tone making clear his displeasure. Senator Donovan will be escorted directly to the courtroom through a separate entrance. Benton frowned. Make sure she understands the rules. No notes leave the courtroom. No discussions with anyone about what she hears. Across town, Eastwood was being prepared for transport. He changed from his prison jumpsuit into a simple dark suit that his son Kyle had brought. Even after weeks in detention, he maintained his dignity. He combed his thin hair carefully and stood straight as the guards placed handcuffs on his wrists. Ready, Mr. Eastwood? Asked the guard, a young man who had grown up watching Eastwood's films. Eastwood nodded. His face gave nothing away. At her hotel, Senator Patricia Donovan was also preparing. She placed the flash drive with the CIA documents in a hidden pocket sewn into her jacket. Her aide Greg looked worried. Senator, are you sure about this? Going against the intelligence community? I'm sure about standing up for the truth, she replied, checking her appearance in the mirror. That's what I was elected to do. Greg hesitated. I received another warning call this morning. They said your committee assignment could be at risk. Patricia smiled grimly. Then I guess I'll have more time for my gardening. By 9 o'clock, the key players were in position. The courtroom had been swept for devices. Armed marshals stood at every door. Only a handful of people were allowed inside: the judge, the lawyers, essential court personnel, and Senator Donovan, who sat in the back row with a court-approved notepad. The side door opened, and Eastwood entered with his attorney. Despite his age and the strain of detention, he walked in with the same measured gait that had carried him across countless movie screens. He nodded slightly to the senator, though they had never met. Judge Benton called the court to order. This hearing is closed by order of the United States government. What is said here today is classified at the highest level. Prosecutor Alan Peters rose first. Your Honor, the government is prepared to present its case against the defendant. Proceed, Benton said. Peters approached the bench. The United States charges Clint Eastwood with violations of the Espionage Act stemming from events in Prague, Czechoslovakia, in 1968. We will show that Mr. Eastwood, while serving as an unwitting courier for a CIA operation, became aware of classified information. When the operation resulted in casualties, Mr. Eastwood was brought back to the United States and sworn to secrecy. He paused, looking directly at Eastwood. The government further charges that in recent months, Mr. Eastwood threatened to reveal details of this operation in a memoir he was preparing, a revelation that would compromise living intelligence assets and damage national security. Linda Harrington stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor, there is no memoir. My client has never threatened to reveal anything. This is a preliminary hearing, Ms. Harrington. The government will present its evidence in due course, Judge Benton said dismissively. Peters continued, describing Operation Spotlight, a Cold War effort to smuggle information past the Iron Curtain using cultural figures as cover. According to Peters, Eastwood had been recruited to deliver what he thought were film scripts, but were actually coded messages to Czech dissidents. The operation went wrong, Peters explained. Czech security forces intercepted the package after Mr. Eastwood delivered it. In the ensuing confrontation, 3 Czech nationals were killed. From her seat, Senator Donovan watched closely. This matched what she had learned, but something was missing. The role of Edward Grant, now the Director of National Intelligence. Peters produced a yellowed document. This is Mr. Eastwood's signed confidentiality agreement from August 1968, acknowledging his understanding that revealing any details of the operation would constitute treason. Linda stood again. Your Honor, even if such an agreement exists, it cannot supersede my client's constitutional rights. And more importantly, the statute of limitations on any such charges expired decades ago. National security matters have no statute of limitations, Ms. Harrington, Judge Benton replied. Then I move that the government present actual evidence that my client threatened to reveal anything. He has maintained his silence for over 50 years. Peters nodded to an assistant, who brought forward a laptop. We have intercepted communications between Mr. Eastwood and his biographer sent 3 months ago. The laptop was turned to face the judge. On screen was an email supposedly from Eastwood that read, "The Prague story must be told. I've kept silent too long. The American people deserve to know what was done in their name." Linda leaned toward Eastwood, who shook his head firmly. Your Honor, she said, rising again, my client denies sending this email. We demand authentication and a chain of custody for this evidence. Judge Benton waved his hand dismissively. Save it for trial, Ms. Harrington. This is merely a preliminary hearing to determine if the case should proceed. Then I request time to present our defense. Proceed, but be brief. Linda called Eastwood to the stand. After being sworn in, he sat tall in the witness chair, his weathered face solemn. Mr. Eastwood, did you send the email we just saw? No, he answered simply. Have you ever discussed the events in Prague with anyone, including a biographer? Never. Why have you maintained your silence all these years? Eastwood looked directly at Peters. Because I gave my word. Because I was told it was a matter of national security. Because I believed in my country. And now? Now I wonder if I was wrong to stay silent. Linda turned to the judge. Your Honor, the government's case rests on fabricated evidence. They claim my client threatened to reveal classified information, yet provide only an unauthenticated email that he denies sending. This is not about national security. This is about silencing Mr. Eastwood before he can expose misconduct from 50 years ago that might embarrass powerful people today. Judge Benton frowned. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Harrington. It's the truth, Your Honor. From the back of the courtroom, Senator Donovan watched the exchange with growing concern. The judge was clearly biased, and Peters seemed too confident. Something wasn't right. As Linda returned to her seat, Peters rose again. Your Honor, the government has one more piece of evidence. He produced a thin file folder. This is a psychiatric evaluation of Mr. Eastwood conducted last week. It suggests he is suffering from age-related cognitive decline and may be confused about his recent actions. Eastwood's face hardened. Linda jumped to her feet. This is outrageous. No such evaluation was conducted with our knowledge or consent. It was done under the special powers granted to the government in national security cases, Peters replied smoothly. As the argument continued, Senator Donovan made her decision. She stood up. Your Honor, she called out clearly, I request permission to address the court. Judge Benton looked startled. Senator Donovan, you are here as an observer only. You have no standing in these proceedings. I am here as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, with oversight responsibility for the agencies involved in this case, she replied firmly. And I have information directly relevant to these proceedings. Peters turned, his face suddenly alarmed. Your Honor, the senator cannot be allowed to interfere with these proceedings. Judge Benton hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, Senator. You may approach the bench. Instead, Patricia Donovan walked to the center of the courtroom. What I have to say should be heard by everyone present. All eyes were on her now. Eastwood watched her intently from the witness stand. Linda Harrington held her breath. And somewhere, in Washington, D.C., powerful men were about to discover that their carefully guarded secret was no longer safe. The courtroom was completely silent as Senator Patricia Donovan stood in the center. Every eye was fixed on her. Judge Benton's face had turned a deep shade of red. Senator, I must remind you that these proceedings are classified, he warned. Any unauthorized disclosure? I understand my responsibilities, Judge Benton, Patricia interrupted. But I also understand my oath to protect the Constitution. What's happening in this courtroom today is not justice. It's a cover-up. Prosecutor Alan Peters moved quickly to the judge's bench. Your Honor, I move that the senator be removed immediately. Benton nodded. Marshal, please escort. Before you do that, Patricia said loudly, you should know that I've secured copies of certain documents. If I'm removed from this courtroom, those documents will be released to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Los Angeles Times within the hour. The marshal, who had started toward her, stopped and looked at the judge for direction. Patricia took advantage of the hesitation. Your Honor, I have evidence that directly contradicts the government's claims against Mr. Eastwood. Evidence that shows this prosecution is not about national security, but about protecting powerful people from their past mistakes. From the witness stand, Clint Eastwood watched the senator with newfound interest. For the first time since his arrest, a hint of hope showed in his eyes. Judge Benton's jaw worked back and forth as he considered his options. Finally, he said, You have 5 minutes, Senator. Choose your words carefully. Patricia nodded. 2 months ago, during a classified briefing with the Intelligence Committee, I noticed a reference to Operation Spotlight in materials about the history of CIA cultural operations. When I asked for more information, I was told those files were unavailable. She looked directly at Peters. That made me curious. Why would 50-year-old files about a Cold War operation be restricted from a committee with top security clearance? Peters shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I began making inquiries, Patricia continued. Most doors closed in my face. But then I received a call from a former CIA officer named Joseph Miller, who had been part of Operation Spotlight. He tried to provide me with documents, but he was intercepted. However, he managed to give me this. She held up the flash drive. Judge Benton frowned. No unauthorized electronic devices are permitted in this courtroom. This isn't just any device. Your Honor, it contains the truth about what happened in Prague in 1968. And more importantly, it contains proof that the email supposedly sent by Mr. Eastwood, the government's key evidence, is a forgery. Linda Harrington stood up. Your Honor, we request that this evidence be examined immediately. Denied, Benton said quickly. Senator Donovan has no standing to introduce evidence. Patricia smiled slightly. Then perhaps you'd prefer to hear my testimony about what I've learned, under oath. Before Benton could respond, the courtroom door opened. A man in a dark suit entered and whispered something to Peters, whose face drained of color. Your Honor, may we have a brief recess? Peters asked. We will continue, Benton said firmly. Senator, you were saying? Patricia walked closer, to the bench. Operation Spotlight wasn't just about delivering messages to Czech dissidents. It was a failed attempt to assassinate a Soviet official visiting Prague. The CIA used Mr. Eastwood as unwitting cover, putting his life at risk without his knowledge or consent. Gasps filled the courtroom. Eastwood himself remained stone-faced, though his hands gripped the arms of the witness chair tightly. The 3 people who died weren't Czech security forces, Patricia continued. They were civilians who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The CIA covered it up, blaming Czech authorities. And the young agent who planned this botched operation, the one who recruited Mr. Eastwood without telling him the truth, was Edward Grant. She turned to face everyone in the courtroom. The same Edward Grant who is now the Director of National Intelligence. The same Edward Grant who personally ordered this case to be reopened when he learned that one of the other agents involved had contacted Mr. Eastwood, hoping to clear his conscience before he died. Linda Harrington stood again. Your Honor, if what the senator is saying is true, then my client is being prosecuted not because he threatened national security, but because Director Grant fears exposure of his past mistakes. Judge Benton banged his gavel. This is all speculation and hearsay. Senator Donovan has no proof of these wild accusations. Actually, I do, Patricia replied calmly. She held up the flash drive again. This contains Agent Miller's personal logs from 1968, which he kept against regulations. It also contains communications between Director Grant's office and the Justice Department from 2 months ago ordering this prosecution. She turned to Peters. And most damaging of all, it contains evidence that the email allegedly sent by Mr. Eastwood was created on a government computer at the National Intelligence Headquarters 3 days before his arrest. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Peters leaned over to whisper urgently to his assistant. Your Honor, Linda called out above the noise, in light of this new information, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. Benton banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order. When the room quieted, he glared at Patricia. Senator, you are making extremely serious accusations against the Director of National Intelligence. If you're wrong, your career is over. And if I'm right, an innocent man is being framed to protect a powerful one, she replied. I'm willing to take that risk. From the witness stand, Eastwood spoke for the first time since the senator began. His voice was quiet, but carried throughout the room. I've been silent for 50 years, he said. I kept my word. I protected secrets. I never asked to know. I watched young men die in a war while I kept making movies, unable to speak about what I'd seen. And now, in my final years, I'm treated like a criminal for a crime I didn't commit. He looked at Patricia. I don't know you, Senator. I don't know why you're risking your career for me. But thank you for bringing the truth to light. Judge Benton cleared his throat. Mr. Eastwood, you are still under oath. Did you know the true nature of Operation Spotlight when you agreed to deliver the package? No, Eastwood answered firmly. I was told it contained cultural materials. Film scripts, nothing more. And did you ever threaten to reveal what you knew? Never. Not once in 50 years. The judge turned to Peters. Does the government have any evidence, real evidence, that Mr. Eastwood has violated his confidentiality agreement? Peters hesitated. The man who had entered earlier leaned forward and whispered in his ear again. Peters straightened up. Your Honor, in light of certain developments, the government requests a 48-hour continuance to review its position. Denied, Benton said, surprising everyone. Senator Donovan's accusations are troubling. If there's even a possibility that this prosecution was initiated for improper purposes, this court has a duty to investigate. He turned to the court clerk. I am ordering that Senator Donovan's evidence be entered into the record under seal. I am also ordering an independent forensic examination of the email allegedly sent by Mr. Eastwood. Linda stood. And my client, Your Honor. Judge Benton looked at Eastwood for a long moment. The courtroom held its breath. Released on his own recognizance pending the outcome of this investigation, he finally said. But, he added, looking at Eastwood directly, you are not to leave the jurisdiction or speak to the press. Eastwood nodded once. Understood, Your Honor. Patricia caught Linda's eye and smiled slightly. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. The truth was finally beginning to emerge from 50 years of darkness. Outside the courtroom, however, Edward Grant was already planning his response. The senator had won this round, but the game was far from over. The media erupted when Clint Eastwood walked out of the federal courthouse that afternoon. Though he said nothing, the images of him leaving without handcuffs spoke volumes. At his side was Linda Harrington, who gave a brief statement. Mr. Eastwood has been released while new evidence is examined. He maintains his innocence and looks forward to complete vindication. Senator Patricia Donovan left through a side entrance, avoiding the press. She knew the real battle was just beginning. As her car pulled away from the courthouse, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington number she didn't recognize. Senator Donovan, she answered. This is Edward Grant. The voice was cold. You've made a serious mistake today. Patricia gripped the phone tighter. The mistake was yours, Director. Framing an innocent man to protect yourself. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Grant said. This goes far beyond one old actor. There are national security implications you can't possibly understand. Save it for the investigation, Director. She ended the call and turned to her aide, Greg. It's starting. Get me on the first flight back to Washington. Meanwhile, Eastwood returned to his home in Carmel for the first time in weeks. His son Kyle was waiting. The two men embraced silently. You look tired, Dad, Kyle said, leading him inside. Eastwood nodded. It's been a long time since I slept in a cell. He looked around at his home, taking in the familiar surroundings. Good to be back. What happens now? Now we wait. The judge ordered an investigation into the evidence. If they find what the senator says they will, the charges should be dropped. Kyle poured his father a small glass of whiskey. And if they don't? Eastwood took the glass, staring into the amber liquid. Then I might have to break my silence after all. In Washington, the machinery of damage control was already in motion. Edward Grant called an emergency meeting with the Attorney General and the White House Chief of Staff in a secure room deep within the Pentagon. This situation is spiraling, the Chief of Staff said. The President wants to know what's going on. Grant paced the room. It's simple. A classified operation from the Cold War era is at risk of exposure due to Senator Donovan's reckless actions. And is it true? The Attorney General asked. Did you falsify evidence against Eastwood? Grant stopped pacing. The email was a necessary measure. Eastwood was contacted by Joseph Miller, a former agent with a grudge and declining mental health. Miller was filling Eastwood's head with the distorted version of events. We needed to act quickly. By framing an American icon? The Chief of Staff shook his head. If this gets out, the administration will be tainted by association. It won't. Get out, Grant insisted. Judge Benton will control the investigation. He understands what's at stake. But Grant was wrong. Judge Howard Benton sat alone in his chambers that evening, reviewing the flash drive Senator Donovan had provided. His hands trembled slightly as he read the documents. After 50 years in law, he had thought himself beyond shock. He was wrong. The logs of Agent Miller were detailed and damning. The operation in Prague had been botched from the start. Eastwood had been used without his knowledge, placing him in grave danger. And the 3 deaths, civilians, just as the senator had said. One was a mother of 2 young children. Most troubling were the recent communications ordering Eastwood's prosecution. They showed a clear pattern of abuse of power, with Grant using national security as a shield for personal protection. Benton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He had cooperated with the government, believing he was protecting national interests. Instead, he had nearly helped imprison an innocent man. He picked up his phone and called the special prosecutor's office. The next morning, Senator Donovan was preparing for a closed Intelligence Committee meeting when her aide rushed. "And Senator, you need to see this." He handed her a tablet showing a breaking news alert. Special prosecutor appointed in Eastwood case. Judge cites serious concerns about prosecutorial misconduct. Patricia smiled. Benton found his conscience. "There's more," Greg said. "Director Grant has taken an emergency leave of absence. Word is the president asked for his resignation after seeing the evidence." In Carmel, Eastwood received the news from Linda Harrington. "The special prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow," she told him over the phone. "They're going to formally drop all charges." "And Grant?" "Under investigation. Himself now. How's that for irony?" Eastwood was quiet for a moment. "Good. There's something else," Linda added. "Joseph Miller has come forward. With Grant removed, he feels safe enough to testify. He wants to meet with you." 2 days later, in a quiet restaurant, in Monterey, Eastwood sat across from an elderly man with thinning white hair and trembling hands. Joseph Miller looked older than his 83 years. "I've been waiting for this moment for 5 decades, Miller said, his voice quavering. "To apologize to you face to face." Eastwood studied him. "You were there? In Prague?" Miller nodded. "I was the junior agent. Grant was lead. He was ambitious, reckless. When things went wrong, he made sure others took the blame." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't have the courage to speak up then. I just followed orders, including making me think. I was delivering movie scripts. Yes, we used you, put you at risk without your consent." Miller's eyes filled with tears. "Those people who died, I still see their faces. The woman was taking her children to school. She was just in the way." Eastwood was silent for a long moment. "I've carried this for 50 years without knowing the whole truth." "And I've carried the guilt," Miller replied. "When I heard they were going after you to keep you quiet, I couldn't stand by again. Not this time." As they talked across the country in Washington, Senator Patricia Donovan held a press conference. With the Justice Department's approval, she revealed selected details about the Eastwood case. An American citizen was prosecuted based on falsified evidence to protect powerful individuals from their past mistakes, she told the assembled reporters. "This is unacceptable in a nation of laws. The investigation is ongoing, but I can confirm that all charges against Mr. Eastwood have been dropped." A reporter called out, "Senator, what exactly happened in Prague in 1968? "Many details remain classified. What I can say is that Mr. Eastwood was used without his knowledge or consent in an intelligence operation. When that operation went wrong, he was sworn to secrecy under threat of treason charges. And he kept that secret for 50 years? Patricia nodded. He did. Even when doing so cost him personally. That speaks to his character and his patriotism." 6 months later, Clint Eastwood stood on the set of what he announced would be his final film. Titled The Silence, it told the story of a man sworn to secrecy about government wrongdoing, who must decide whether to speak out when innocent lives are at stake. The screenplay, written with his input but carefully fictionalized to protect classified details, had sparked intense interest in Hollywood. Critics were already calling it the most important film of his career. As he prepared to shoot the final scene, a production assistant approached. "Mr. Eastwood, you have a visitor." Senator Donovan stood at the edge of the set. Eastwood walked over to greet her. Senator, I didn't know you were in California. Committee business in Los Angeles, she explained. I thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing. Eastwood gestured around the set. Keeping busy, telling stories. Important ones, she said. The investigation is almost complete. Grant will face charges along with several others. Good. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. An unlikely alliance formed through extraordinary circumstances. Thank you, Eastwood said finally, for doing what I couldn't. Patricia smiled. Sometimes the system works, Mr. Eastwood. Sometimes the truth does come out. Even if it takes 50 years? Even then. Eastwood looked toward the set, where the Yar crew waited for him to return. I should get back, we're losing the light. Of course. As she turned to leave, Eastwood called after her. Senator, in my experience, the truth always finds its voice eventually. No silence lasts forever. Patricia nodded. I'm counting on it. Eastwood returned to his place on the set, ready to direct the final scene of his remarkable career. After decades of enforced silence, he had found a new voice, and with it, a powerful story to tell.